Picture a girl, 20 years old, sitting in seat 14A on a 14-hour flight from Seoul to Chicago, pressed against the window like the glass might hold her together. The city lights of Seoul are still visible below, gold and cold and enormous, shrinking the longer she stares at them, shrinking the way everything shrinks when you are leaving it behind, and you know, with the specific certainty of someone who has already made the decision and cannot unmake it, that you are never coming back the same way you arrived. She is not crying. She wants to. The crying is there. She can feel it sitting behind her sternum like something waiting for permission. But she does not cry. She stares at the lights until Seoul disappears into cloud and black water, and then she stares at her own reflection in the dark window instead. And the girl looking back at her is someone she does not entirely recognize yet. Someone who is in the process of becoming. She has a suitcase in the overhead compartment. She has a secret in her body. She has nothing else. No plan, no husband, no ring, no note left on a pillow. No goodbye said to the man whose child she is carrying, the man who looked at her like she was the only interesting thing in a room full of interesting things. Because if she had looked at his face one more time, she would not have been able to board this plane. And boarding this plane is the only thing standing between her child and a family that does not negotiate with complications. A family that eliminates them. So she boards the plane. She does not look back. And for 7 years, 7 long, hard, brilliant, exhausting years, Roberta Timfrey keeps that promise to herself. She does not look back. She builds a career in Chicago that has nothing to do with who she loved in Seoul, and everything to do with being the sharpest person in every room she enters. She raises a son alone, a son who is, by any objective measurement, the most unsettling 6-year-old in recorded history, a child who wears 3-piece suits to kindergarten and negotiates his bedtime like it is a corporate merger, and reads the Wall Street Journal at breakfast with the focused expression of a man who has opinions about the market and is not afraid to share them. She builds a life, a real one. A life with weight and texture and a corner office, and a son who smirks at grown men and makes them feel assessed. And then her firm sends her to Seoul. Just 3 days, her boss says. Sign the contracts, attend the gala. You have earned this. And Roberta Timfrey, who has outrun fear before, who has built something extraordinary from nothing, who does not beg and does not break, packs her bags and books the flights because there is no version of no that does not cost her something she is not willing to pay. She walks into the Grand Hyatt Seoul telling herself she is ready. She has her armor on, the good suit, the composed face. 7 years of becoming someone who does not flinch. And then her 6-year-old son, in his burgundy tie, holding his juice box, vibrating with the specific energy of a small person who has identified a threat and is already in motion, sets down his juice box on the nearest surface, adjusts his tie with the precision of a man entering a board meeting, and marches across the marble lobby toward the most dangerous man in Seoul, toward a man who is standing completely still in the middle of that lobby, staring at his mother, like 7 years is nothing, like she never left. Like he has been standing in that exact spot, in that exact stillness, waiting for the elevator doors to open and return what was taken from him. And now that it has happened, he does not know how to move, or breathe, or look away. Kai stops 3 feet from the man, crosses his arms, looks up with a smirk that does not belong on any child's face, and says, in a voice so clear and so fearless and so completely his father's that Roberta's blood turns to ice in her veins. Excuse me, sir. Why are you staring at my mother like you want to eat her for breakfast? And Han Min-jae, billionaire, empire builder, is the most feared man in Seoul, the man who has not lost a single negotiation in a decade, looks down at the miniature version of himself standing 3 feet away with his own eyes and his own jaw, and his own terrifying composure. And his world tilts completely off its axis, because those are his eyes, that is his jaw. That is the child Roberta Timfrey disappeared to protect. The child he did not know existed until this exact moment in this hotel lobby in the city where he has been searching for her for 7 years. 7 years. And she is standing 20 feet away in a suit that fits like armor, and she is not running, and she is not begging, and she is not afraid. Or if she is afraid, she has buried it somewhere so deep it does not reach her face. And Han Min-jae, who controls everything, who has controlled everything since the morning his grandfather told him that Han men do not show what they want, cannot control the expression on his face. Not this time. Not with those eyes looking up at him. This is the story of what happens next. This is the story of 7 years of silence and the 6-year-old who ended it in 30 seconds. This is the story of 2 people who lost the same thing to the same fear. And the child in the 3-piece suit who decided, with the calm efficiency of a tiny CEO who has already run the data and reached his conclusion, that this particular inefficiency had gone on long enough. The first thing Roberta noticed about Han Min-jae was not the money. It was not the suit, though the suit was extraordinary. It was not the building, though the building was the kind of architecture that made ordinary people feel like footnotes. It was not the way his name moved through a room before he entered it, carried by the staff who straightened their spines when they heard it, by the board members who rearranged their posture, by the air itself, which seemed to understand that something consequential was about to occupy it. It was the silence, the specific silence that fell when Han Min-jae walked in. Not the silence of fear, though fear was present. The silence of attention. The kind that happens when every person in a room makes the same unconscious calculation at the same moment and arrives at the same conclusion. That this man does not need to raise his voice. That this man has never needed to raise his voice. That the men who raised their voices around Han Min-jae did so once, and then they did not. He was 24 years old. He walked into that conference room on the 47th floor of Han Group headquarters like he had been born at the head of the table, which, in every way that mattered, he had. Dark suit, dark eyes. The unhurried movement of a man who understood that the world would wait for him because the world had always waited for him, and he had never given it a reason to stop. He did not look at Roberta when he entered. He looked at the proposal on the table. He sat. He read. 45 seconds of complete silence while every other person in the room held very still. Then he looked up. He looked at her father first. The assessing, cataloging look of a man who processed people the way most people process documents, efficiently and without sentiment. Then his eyes moved to Roberta. She was holding a folder. Research she had prepared the night before, cross-referenced across 3 legal databases because she had not been able to sleep, and working was the thing she did instead of sleeping. She was wearing her most professional blazer. She had her most composed expression in place, the one she had been practicing since her father first took her into rooms full of powerful people and told her to be invisible. She was not invisible. Min-jae Han looked at her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of the kind of attention that felt less like being seen and more like being read. Like he was not simply registering her presence but cataloging it, filing it somewhere careful and deliberate, somewhere he intended to return to. Then he looked back at her father and asked, with no change in his voice whatsoever, whether the supplementary materials had been prepared by Kelly or by someone else. Her father said, "My daughter." Min-jae Han said nothing. He did not look at her again for the rest of that meeting. But Roberta felt it for the entire hour. The weight of not being looked at by someone who had already decided to look at you very carefully later. The specific gravity of a man practicing restraint. She told herself on the elevator ride down that she was imagining it. She was a 20-year-old law student from Chicago in a room full of Seoul's most powerful men. She was useful furniture, a research assistant, a footnote. She was not imagining it. It started with the library. He was there on a Tuesday when she arrived. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a legal pad full of handwriting so small and precise it looked like its own private language. He did not acknowledge her when she entered. She did not acknowledge him. They worked in silence for 40 minutes with the specific quality of two people performing not noticing so carefully that the not noticing became its own conversation. When he left, he paused at the door and told her, without turning around, without being asked, exactly where to find the case she had been unable to locate for the past 3 hours. Second shelf. Blue binding. She would find it. She found it. She stood in the empty library holding that blue-bound volume, and she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who has just recognized the first move in a game she did not know she was playing, and that Han Min-jae had been watching her closely enough to know what she needed before she asked for it, that he had waited 40 minutes before telling her, that he had chosen the last possible moment, the exit, so she could not ask him how he knew. She should have been unsettled. She was something else entirely. He began walking her to her car. He did not ask. He did not announce it. He simply fell into step beside her when she left the library on Thursday evening, and he walked with her through the building and into the elevator and through the underground garage to the place where her car was parked. And when they arrived, he looked at the lighting fixture on the ceiling, noted that it had been malfunctioning for 2 weeks, said he would have it corrected by the following Tuesday, and walked back to the elevator without looking at her once. He walked her to her car every Tuesday and Thursday after that. They never discussed this arrangement. It simply existed, the way certain things exist between two people who are moving towards something and have silently agreed to let it happen without naming it too soon, because naming it too soon would require them to decide, and neither of them was ready to decide, because deciding meant acknowledging what was already true, and what was already true was inconvenient for both of them in very different ways. Roberta Timfrey was inconvenient because she was her father's research assistant and a visiting student, and a 20-year-old Black American girl in a city where that combination made her, by every calculation, the wrong choice. Han Min-jae was inconvenient because he was Han Min-jae, the heir to an empire that had never made a decision based on something as inefficient as desire. And yet, she fell in love with him between September and December, in the specific incremental way that the worst kinds of falling happen, not all at once, not dramatically, not with any single moment she could later point to and say there, that was the one, but steadily, the way water finds stone, the way something inevitable finds its way, regardless of what you place in its path. It was the midnight ramen. He found her in a convenience store near the Han estate at 11:30 on a Wednesday, to buying instant noodles because she had worked through dinner and she was starving, and she was not yet fluent enough in Korean to navigate the restaurant menu near her apartment with confidence. He stood in the aisle beside her for a moment, looked at what she was holding, and said, with the flat certainty of a man who did not make suggestions, only pronouncements, "That brand is terrible." Then he drove her to a place 40 minutes outside the city, a small ramen shop down a side street that had no signage and no reservation system, and a line out the door even at midnight. And the owner knew him by name and gave them the table in the back corner, and Roberta ate the best bowl of ramen she had ever tasted in her life, while Han Min-jae sat across from her and watched her eat with an expression she had never seen on his face in any boardroom or conference room or formal family dinner, something quiet and unguarded, like a door left open by accident. "You like it," he said. Not a question, an observation. "It is extraordinary," she said. "I have been coming here since I was 16, he said. "My grandfather brought me the first time. He said a man should know at least one place in the city where the food is honest." He paused. You are the first person I have brought here." She looked at him across that small table in that ramen shop at midnight. He looked back at her the way he always looked at her in the moments when he forgot to not look. Directly, entirely, with the specific focused attention of a man who has decided that this particular thing in front of him is worth every bit of his considerable concentration. "You should not say things like that," she said. "I know," he said. He did not stop. He was possessive in the way of men who have never been taught to be anything else, not aggressively, not loudly, but with a completeness that was somehow more alarming than aggression because it required no performance at all. A junior associate from her father's firm made the mistake of finding Roberta interesting at a Han family function. He was charming about it, harmless. He talked to her for 12 minutes near the garden entrance while Min-jae was on the opposite side of the room in conversation with 3 men who controlled significant portions of Seoul's financial sector. Min-jae was beside her in under 60 seconds. He did not touch her. He did not raise his voice. He did not say anything to the associate that could be catalogued as a threat by anyone taking notes. He simply stood close enough that the geometry of the situation communicated everything that needed communicating. The associate excused himself shortly after. When Roberta looked at Min-jae, his expression was exactly what it always was: controlled, flat, unreadable, except for his jaw. The jaw was doing something. "You were not subtle," she said. "I was not trying to be," he said. He was harmless. "Yes," Min-jae said. He was. And something in the way he said it, the specific weight of that was, made it very clear that the harmlessness had been assessed and confirmed, and the assessment had not made the situation any more acceptable. She told herself she found it irritating. She found it the opposite of irritating, and she was honest enough, in the privacy of her own chest, to admit it. Loving Han Min-jae was like holding fire in bare hands. She knew this even then, while it was happening, while it was still beautiful and warm and contained enough to feel like something she could manage. She knew the Han family operated in spaces that did not appear on any legal map. She knew the politicians who returned their calls were not returning them as a courtesy. She knew the competitors who stopped competing had made calculations that had nothing to do with market forces. She knew all of this, and she loved him anyway, because that is the specific cruelty of falling for someone before you have fully assembled the evidence. By the time the evidence is complete, you are already somewhere you cannot simply leave. He told her once, in the small hours of a morning when Seoul was quiet, and they were sitting on the floor of the library surrounded by open books and empty coffee cups, that he had never wanted to inherit the empire. "Your grandfather built it for you," she said. "He built it for himself," Min-jae said. "I am the continuation of a decision he made before I was born. I did not choose it. What would you choose?" He was quiet for a long time. "I would choose this," he said. He was not looking at the books. "Whatever this is." She should have asked him to define it. She did not ask him to define it. She let it sit between them like something precious and unnamed, and she told herself there would be time later to ask the harder questions. There was not time later. She found out on a Thursday morning. The test was on the edge of the bathroom sink. 2 lines. She sat on the cold tile floor for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just sitting with the information the way you sit with something that has just fundamentally altered the floor plan of your life, letting it settle into the walls, letting it find its level, understanding that the room is different now and will never be the previous room again, no matter how much you want it to be. She was 20 years old. She was carrying the heir to the Han Empire, and she could hear in the back of her mind Min-jae's voice from a conversation 3 months earlier. A late night, a glass of wine, the city lights below the terrace looking like something someone had scattered deliberately to be beautiful. "If I ever have a son," he had said, with the offhand certainty of a man stating a preference he has never had to justify, "he will rule the world." She had laughed at the time. She had said something about arrogance being hereditary. He had not laughed. He had looked at her with that steady, deliberate look and said, "Not arrogance, expectation. There is a difference." She thought about that line now, sitting on the bathroom floor. He will rule the world. She thought about what it meant for a Han to rule the world, what family it would require, what alliances, what arrangements, what happened to the complications that appeared before the arrangements were in place. The cold spread through her slowly. She already knew the answer. She had known it for months, sitting in rooms full of people who deferred to Min-jae's grandmother with the specific deference of people who understood that her approval was not optional and her displeasure was not merely unpleasant. She already knew what the Han family did with complications. She just had not yet had a reason to apply that knowledge to herself. She told him that night, in his car, parked in the underground structure of a building 3 miles from anything connected to the Han family, in the dark, with the city sealed away above them and just the two of them and the thing she was about to say. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He stared through the windshield with the expression of a man whose mind has just received a piece of information so large that every other process has suspended itself to handle the load. Then, "Are you sure?" "Yes." "How far along?" 6 weeks. More silence, and then, quietly, so quietly she had to replay it twice to be certain she had heard it correctly. "What do you want to do?" "Not, I am here." "Not, we will figure this out together." "Not, I love you." Nothing about this changes that. Just, what do you want to do? The question of a man who is calculating, who is already running the variables, who is already somewhere else in his mind, in some boardroom she cannot see, where this situation is being assessed and options are being weighted. Her heart broke very quietly in the front seat of that car. She did not let him see it. "I don't know," she said. "My family cannot know about this," he said. "If they find out you are carrying..." He stopped himself. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to, because she heard the rest of it in the silence. She heard exactly what the Han family did when an heir's involvement produced an inconvenient pregnancy with a foreign woman with no family name and no strategic value. She heard it in the silence between his words, the way she heard everything important about Han Min-jae, not in what he said, but in the precise shape of what he chose not to say. "Give me a week," he said. "I will figure something out. I promise." He drove her home. He said goodnight. He drove away. She did not hear from him for 3 days. On the 3rd day, her mother walked into her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed with the specific calm that precedes the most devastating conversations. The stillness of a woman who has already decided, who has already assembled her argument, who is delivering a verdict rather than opening a discussion. "You are pregnant." It was not a question. The conversation with her father lasted 2 hours. He did not yell. He was worse than yelling. He was quiet and clear and terrified, and he laid it out the way he laid out every legal argument, in sequence, without sentiment, with the specific precision of a man who needed her to understand that this was not an emotional position. This was a calculation, and the calculation had only one viable outcome. "The Han family does not manage problems," he said. "They remove them. If they discover that you are carrying their grandchild, a Han heir, outside of any arrangement they sanctioned, one of 2 things happens. Either they take that child and ensure you are no longer a factor in the equation, or they decide that an illegitimate heir with an inconvenient foreign mother is a liability they cannot afford, and they remove both of you. Those are the options. There is no third option. Min-jae would not. Min-jae is not the head of this family." Her father's voice was not raised. It was something more absolute than raised. "His grandmother is." and his grandmother has been managing inconvenient situations for 40 years. Do not bet your life on the hope that a 24-year-old man loves you more than he fears her. Her mother was already pulling suitcases from the closet, and they packed in 2 hours. Her father sent a resignation email. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone. The flight out of Seoul was at 4 a.m. Roberta sat in seat 14A and pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched the city lights of Seoul shrink below her, gold and cold and enormous and indifferent. And she did not cry. She had made her decision. Crying implied doubt, and she had no more room for doubt. Doubt was a luxury for people who still had options, and she had reduced her options down to the one that kept her child alive, and she was executing that option with both hands. And there was no version of this that included tears, because tears would mean she was not certain, and she could not afford to be uncertain. She was 20 years old. She was carrying a child who had his father's eyes, and though she did not know that yet, she was carrying a secret that would take 7 years to surface. She was leaving behind the only man she had ever loved without a goodbye, without an explanation, without a single word that might have told him, if he had loved her the way she thought he did, the way some nights she was almost certain he did, that she was not choosing to leave him. She was choosing to keep his child alive. The lights of Seoul disappeared into cloud. Roberta Timfrey pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, held it there for 1 moment, and then pulled it away. She did not look back. She had already decided. Chicago in February is not beautiful. It is honest. It is gray and cold, and it does not apologize for either of those things. And there is something in that honesty that suited Roberta Timfrey in the months after she arrived, the way the city made no promises, offered no softness, simply existed in its rawness and dared you to build something inside it anyway. She built. She moved into her mother's house with her suitcase and her secret, and the specific determination of a woman who has closed a door behind her and understands that looking back at it is not an option she can afford. She enrolled back into law school for the following semester. She told no one the full truth of what she was leaving. She set her jaw and she studied, and she grew, and she did not stop moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant the 4 a.m. flight, and the cold glass and the city lights shrinking below her, and the face of a man she had not said goodbye to. She did not allow herself to remember, except at night. At night was different. At night, the controls came off in the specific involuntary way of sleep, and Han Min-jae walked back into her mind the way he had always walked into rooms. Without announcement, without apology, taking up exactly the space he required and leaving no room for anything else. She would dream of the library, of the ramen shop at midnight, of the terrace and the Seoul skyline, and the way he had said I would choose this without looking at the books, when without needing to look at anything except her. She would wake at 3 a.m. with her hand pressed against the side of her stomach, and the dream already dissolving, and the ceiling of her childhood bedroom replacing the 47th floor, and the cold replacing the warmth, and the silence replacing his voice. She would lie there for exactly as long as she could afford. Then she would get up, and she would study. Kai was born in August on a Tuesday morning. The nurse placed him in her arms, and Roberta looked at her son for the first time, and her entire interior architecture rearranged itself permanently and without warning, the way an earthquake does not ask permission before it changes the landscape. He was 7 pounds and 2 ounces of the most serious face she had ever seen on a human being of any age. He looked at her. This new person. This brand new person who had never seen anything, who had no data, no context, no frame of reference for a single thing in the world, with the focused, assessing expression of a man who has just walked into a meeting and is already forming opinions about the agenda. He had her mouth. He had his father's eyes. She held him and made him a promise that she whispered too quietly for anyone else in the room to hear. That she would tell him everything when he was old enough. That his father was not an absence. He was a complication, a story, something unfinished that she did not yet have the words to complete. That she was going to build them something. Then she went home, and she started building. She studied while he slept. She studied with him in a bassinet in the corner of her room, close enough that she could reach him with one hand and hold a highlighter with the other, the case brief spread across the desk and the baby breathing softly in the blue Chicago dark, and the two of them in that room together at 2 a.m., like a very small and very determined country of two. She worked while he learned to walk. She took the bar exam with Kai in a childcare room down the hall, and she passed on the first attempt, and she allowed herself exactly 45 minutes of sitting in her car in the parking garage before she picked him up and drove them both home, because 45 minutes was all she had before the next thing required her. Pain, she discovered during those years, is extraordinarily productive when you aim it correctly. Every case brief she wrote at midnight was aimed. Every argument she constructed in the gray early hours before Kai woke was aimed. Every time she sat across from opposing counsel who had twice her experience and 3 times her resources and looked at them with the specific composure of a woman who has already survived the worst thing that has happened to her and found it survivable, that was aimed too. At what? Not at Min Jae. She did not permit herself the indulgence of that target. At the life she had promised her son in a hospital room in August. At the thing she was building. At the proof she was assembling, day by day, case by case, that she had not made a mistake when she boarded that plane. That the thing she had chosen to protect was worth protecting. That Kai was worth every single thing it cost her. Kai, it should be noted, was worth it. Kai was also completely impossible. By 18 months, he had organized his toys by color, size, and frequency of use, and left a handwritten note, in letters he had no business knowing yet, explaining the system and why it was superior to the previous arrangement. By 3, he was correcting arithmetic errors with the patient, slightly disappointed expression of a man who expected better. By 4, he had read his first chapter book and asked, with genuine intellectual concern, why the protagonist continued making financial decisions that were objectively counterproductive to his stated goals. By 6, Kai Timfrey wore 3-piece suits to kindergarten, read the Wall Street Journal at breakfast with focused attention, and treated every negotiation, bedtime, vegetables, screen time, or the route to school, as an opportunity to demonstrate his considerable strategic capabilities. Mom. He had appeared in the doorway of her home office one Saturday morning in his navy suit and his expression of a man who has done the research. I have a proposal regarding the weekend schedule. Kai, it is 7:30 in the morning. Optimal negotiation occurs before the opposing party has fully established their position. I have prepared 3 points. She had looked at him. This small, serious, suited person who had emerged from her body 6 years ago and had apparently spent every moment since preparing to run something. And she had felt the specific emotion she always felt when Kai was most himself. Equal parts love and terror, and the unsettling certainty that she was already outmatched. 3 points, she said. 3 points. He confirmed. I will be brief. He was not brief. He was thorough, structured, and ultimately persuasive, which meant she had herself to blame because she had been the one to teach him that preparation was the difference between winning and losing, and he had taken that lesson and applied it to everything, including her, with no apparent awareness that it was supposed to have limits. He pranked her constantly. He switched her regular coffee to decaf and watched her move through the morning in baffled exhaustion while he ate his perfectly portioned breakfast with the contained satisfaction of a man whose experiment is proceeding exactly as hypothesized. He reorganized her case files alphabetically by client name instead of date. which was technically more logical. She could not even argue against it, and completely dismantled her system in the process. He once convinced his kindergarten teacher that he needed to be excused from nap time to attend a business meeting. Kai. What meeting? Tommy wanted Sarah's blocks. Sarah wanted Tommy's trucks. I facilitated a mutually beneficial exchange. That is a merger. I know. He had said it with perfect calm. I mentioned that to the teacher. But the humor was always threaded through with something that was not funny at all. The thing that lived underneath every brilliant Kai moment, every negotiation and observation and precocious pronouncement. The thing Roberta caught herself looking at when she thought she was just looking at her son. Every time Kai frowned at something that was not performing to his standards, she saw Min-jae. The precise set of his jaw, and the specific quality of his stillness when he was thinking. The way his eyes moved when he was doing the calculation, not darting, not searching, just processing, moving through the data with a focus that made everything else in the room feel slightly irrelevant. She saw Min-jae in the way Kai walked into a room and immediately assessed it. She saw Min-jae in the way Kai delivered a verdict, flat, downward, certain, as if the conclusion had been obvious for some time, and he was simply being courteous by explaining it. She saw Min-jae in the way Kai looked at her sometimes, like she was the most important data point in the room, and he was taking very good care of it. It was dangerous. It was beautiful, and impossible, and dangerous. And because every time she saw Min-jae in her son's face, she was back on the 47th floor of Han Group headquarters, and the library was quiet, and his hand was covering hers on the spine of a blue-bound book, and neither of them was moving. She filed it away. She went back to work. The question came on a Wednesday. Kai was 5. He was at the kitchen table with his homework and his juice box and his notebook of what he called strategic observations, and Roberta was making dinner, and the apartment was ordinary and warm and small in the way she had made it warm and small, deliberately, carefully, as a counterweight to everything large and dangerous in the world outside it. Mom. A pause. The specific pause of a small person assembling the correct words for a question they have been considering for longer than the pause suggests. Statistically speaking, he said this with the careful neutrality of a scientist presenting a hypothesis. Is my father dead? The knife in her hand stopped. Why would you think that? Because you never talk about him. And you only don't talk about things that either don't exist or hurt too much to mention. He looked at her with those eyes. Those specific, devastating, completely familiar eyes. He exists. So. She turned off the burner. She sat across from him at the table and she looked at her 5-year-old son, and she chose her words with the same care she chose words in courtrooms. Precisely, without anything she could not support. He is not dead, she said. He is in Seoul. And it is very complicated. And I will tell you everything when you are old enough to hold the whole story. How old? Older than 5? Kai looked at her for a moment. That is not a specific answer. No, she said. It is not. He picked up his pencil. Okay, he said, and went back to his homework. He did not push. He did not press. He simply filed the information and adjusted his understanding accordingly and waited. With the patience of a child who had inherited his father's talent for the strategic deployment of stillness. For the rest of the story, he would not have to wait much longer. The call came on a Monday. Her supervising partner at Hartman Ellis, a man who had recruited her, promoted her, and was now looking at her across a desk with the expression of someone delivering news he considered unambiguous good fortune, slid a file across the table. The Huang deal, he said, billion-dollar cross-border merger, American tech, Korean manufacturer. Your name is on every critical document. The signing ceremony is in Seoul in 3 weeks. You need to be there in person. Roberta looked at the file. She did not touch it. The gala is the following evening. Attendance is expected from lead counsel on both sides. He leaned back. Roberta, this is the deal that makes you untouchable. This is the one that puts your name in rooms you have not been in yet. You have spent 6 years building toward exactly this. She looked at the file for a long time. Seoul, she said. 3 days, he said. Sign the contracts. Attend the gala. Come home. Done. 3 days. 3 days in a city of 10 million people. The statistical probability of encountering one specific man in 3 days in a city of 10 million people was negligible. It was negligible. She had done the calculation while sitting very still in that chair with the file in front of her and the walls of her carefully constructed Chicago life pressing close around her, and the calculation came back negligible every single time. Han Min-jae was running an empire. He was in board meetings and acquisition strategies, and the specific orchestrated choreography of a man who controlled $300 billion and had no reason to be in a hotel lobby on a Tuesday morning. She opened the file. She accepted the assignment. She went home and told Kai they were going to Seoul. And Kai, who had been waiting, with the patient certainty of someone who has always known the story was not finished, looked up from his homework with those eyes. Those specific, devastating, irreversible eyes, and said, I know. 7 years ago, Roberta Timfrey ran from Seoul at 4 a.m. with a suitcase and a secret, and the specific terror of a woman who understood that the city she was leaving would consume her if she stayed. She ran in the dark. She ran quietly. She ran without looking back because looking back was not something she could afford. This time, she walked in through the front door of Incheon International Airport on a Tuesday morning, wearing a charcoal blazer that had cost more than her first month's rent in Chicago, carrying a carry-on that contained 3 changes of clothes and every document required for a $1 billion signing ceremony, with a 6-year-old in a navy 3-piece suit walking beside her with his small briefcase and his tablet, and the focused expression of a man arriving in a new territory and already forming operational assessments. This time, she walked. She walked the way 6 years of winning had taught her to walk, with the specific unhurried authority of a woman who has learned that the room adjusts to her pace, not the other way around. Her heels on the airport floor said something. They said, I was here before, and I left. And I came back. And the second version of me is considerably more expensive than the first. Seoul met her the same way it always had. Cold light, sharp architecture, the weight of money being very still in very tall buildings. The smell of the city, particular and familiar in the way only the smell of a place you once loved can be familiar, bypassing the mind entirely and landing somewhere more inconvenient. Somewhere that remembered things the mind had spent 7 years trying to file under resolved. She breathed it in once, pressed it down, kept walking. Your cortisol levels are elevated, Kai said beside her, not looking up from his tablet. I am fine. You have checked the itinerary 4 times since we landed. You only do that when you are anxious. He looked up briefly. Also, your jaw is doing the thing. What thing? The thing it does when you are managing something. She looked at her son. Her son looked back at her with those eyes. I am fine, she said again. Kai made a small sound that communicated without words that he had logged the response and reserved the right to revisit it. The Grand Hyatt Seoul was exactly what money looked like when it had been in the same rooms long enough to stop trying. No performance, no statement. Just the quiet weight of surfaces that had been chosen by people who understood that quality did not need to announce itself because anyone worth impressing would already recognize it. Roberta checked them in with her composed face in place, her professional armor fully assembled. The blazer, the posture, the expression that said, I belong in this room, and the room is fortunate to have me. She had learned that expression in courtrooms, and she wore it everywhere now because it was load-bearing. because the woman inside the armor was still, sometimes, at 3 a.m., 20 years old and pressed against a plane window watching Seoul disappear, and the armor was the thing that ensured no one could tell. Kai stood at the window of their suite on the 22nd floor and looked at the city below with the expression of a general surveying new territory and finding the infrastructure adequate. "This is a well-designed city," he said. "You have never been here before. I can assess from visual data." He turned from the window. The financial district is visible from this position. 3 major conglomerate towers in the northeast quadrant, high economic density, efficient spatial organization. "You are 6, she said. 6.5, he said, "and I have been reading about Seoul since you told me we were coming." It seemed prudent to understand the operational context of the trip. She looked at him standing at that window in his navy suit with his small hands clasped behind his back, a gesture she had seen 1,000 times, and that still, every single time, rearranged something in her chest that she could not fully name. "Come away from the window," she said. "We have dinner reservations." Kai came away from the window without argument, which meant he had already seen everything he needed to see. The next morning arrived with the specific quality of days that are about to become something you will spend a long time afterward trying to understand. Roberta did not know this when she woke. She knew only the schedule. 7:45 departure, car to the venue, preliminary document review with opposing counsel before the 10 o'clock signing. She dressed with the methodical focus of a woman preparing for a performance she has rehearsed 1,000 times. Each item of clothing chosen and assembled as part of an argument she was making without words about who she was and what she was worth. Kai was already dressed when she emerged. Of course he was. Kai was always dressed before she was, with the specific punctuality of someone who considered readiness a form of respect. They came out of the elevator into the lobby at 7:45. Roberta was looking at her phone, confirming the morning schedule with her assistant in Chicago, half her attention on the lobby and half on the message she was composing, and so the first thing she registered was not what she saw. It was what she felt. The specific prickling awareness of being watched, not casually, not as part of the ambient social attention of a busy hotel lobby where people moved and noticed and moved on. This was different. This was the feeling of someone's entire focus landing on you. The weight of it, the intention behind it, the specific quality of attention that does not waver or shift or pretend to be anything other than what it is. She looked up. He was standing near the concierge desk, frozen, mid-step, as if the sight of her had interrupted a signal his body had been following, and his body had not yet received new instructions. 7 years had happened to Han Min-jae in the way that time happens to certain men, not diminishing what was already there, but refining it, distilling it, removing everything that was not essential until only the absolute core remained. He was harder, older, more completely himself than the 24-year-old she had loved in library corners and ramen shops at midnight. The warmth she remembered, the thing that had lived underneath the control, visible only in unguarded moments, had been pressed so deep she could not see it from 20 feet away in a hotel lobby. What she could see was the suit, dark, precise, the color of deep water at night. What she could see was the stillness, the specific, absolute Han Min-jae stillness, the kind that happened when he stopped all other processing to focus entirely on one thing. That thing was her. Her hands went cold. Her chest did something that she would later describe to no one because there were no words for the specific physical experience of seeing, after 7 years of absence, the face of the person who had occupied the part of your memory that you kept the most carefully locked, and finding that the lock had never been as secure as you believed. And she looked back at her phone. She was not here. He had not seen her. This was a coincidence in a city of 10 million people, and it was already resolving itself, and she simply needed to walk toward the hotel entrance and get into the car and, "Mom," Kai's voice. Low. Precise. The voice he used when he had identified something requiring attention. That man is staring at you. Ignore it. He has been staring for over 2 minutes. That is statistically outside the range of normal social observation. A brief pause. He looks like he has seen something he thought was gone. Kai, please. Her son was already moving. She watched it happen with the helpless clarity of a person watching something inevitable in slow motion. Kai set his juice box on the nearest surface with the deliberate care of a man setting down something he intends to return to. He adjusted his burgundy tie with 2 precise movements. He squared his small shoulders, and he walked across the marble lobby toward Han Min-jae with the unhurried, purposeful stride of someone who has assessed a situation, determined a response, and is executing it. The lobby continued its ordinary morning life around them. Staff at the desk, guests crossing to the entrance, the city visible through the tall glass, indifferent and enormous. And in the center of it, a 6-year-old boy in a 3-piece suit walked up to the most powerful man in Seoul and stopped exactly 3 feet away, crossed his arms, looked up. "Excuse me, sir." His voice was clear, confident, the voice of a person who has never once doubted their right to occupy space. "Why are you staring at my mother like you want to eat her for breakfast?" Min-jae Han looked down. The shock hit first. She could see it from 20 feet away, the way it moved through him like a current through still water, disturbing everything beneath the surface while the surface struggled to hold. Then the shock became something else. He looked at the child in front of him the way a man looks at something that is rearranging his entire understanding of the past 7 years in real time. Not with confusion, but with the dawning, devastating recognition of a person who has just received information so large that the mind must expand to contain it before it can respond. The jawline, the eyes, the posture, the specific quality of stillness in a 6-year-old's body that had no business being there, that belonged to a man, or that belonged to one particular man who was standing in a hotel lobby in Seoul, watching a small version of himself cross his arms and wait for an answer with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it. Min-jae went pale, slowly, the way light leaves a room in the evening, gradually and then completely. He crouched down, slowly, with the careful movement of a man approaching something precious and breakable that he has no right to touch but cannot make himself step away from. He brought himself to eye level with the boy who was watching him with those eyes, his eyes, and held very still. "Because," he said, and his voice was not what it was supposed to be. It was not the controlled, flat instrument of a man who had spent 20 years learning to keep everything out of his voice. It was rough, raw, stripped of every defense by the simple fact of those eyes looking back at him from a child's face. "I think I might know your mother." Kai studied him, the focused, unhurried assessment of a small person with a very large mind running the data. "You have my eyebrows," Kai said. Min-jae's composure fractured, just at the edges, just enough to let something through. Something that was not quite a laugh and not quite devastation, and was somehow both at the same time, before he controlled it. "Do I?" he said. "And my jaw?" Kai tilted his head slightly. "And the way you went still when you saw me. I do that too when I am processing something unexpected." He paused. "My mother does not do that. She goes very calm. It is a different response pattern. You study people. I study everything." Kai said it the way he said most things. As a simple fact, I requiring no defense. It is more efficient than being surprised by them. "That," Min-jae said very quietly, "is something I used to tell myself." Roberta reached them. She did not remember crossing the lobby. She was simply at Kai's side, one hand on his shoulder, her professional composure assembled with the desperate precision of a woman building a wall with both hands while the flood is already coming through. She made herself look at him. 7 years later, and her body recognized him before her mind gave it permission. That was the most honest thing she could say about the moment, that the recognition was not intellectual. It was not a memory accessed through cognition. It was physical, immediate, in the specific cellular acknowledgement of proximity to someone whose presence your body had memorized years ago and had never been told to forget. His scent was the same. She registered this before she registered anything else, the faint cedar and something she had never been able to name that had been the smell of the library on Thursday evenings, and the front seat of a black car, and the moments she had spent 6 years trying to push below the waterline. It was still the same. 7 years. The same. Roberta. Her name in his mouth was different than it had been in anyone else's mouth for 7 years. It landed differently. It had a different weight. Like it had been stored somewhere for a long time and he was using it carefully, aware of how much it had accumulated while it waited. Min-jae, she said, steady, professional. The voice of a woman who runs into the father of her secret child in hotel lobbies and handles it like a partner-level attorney because she is a partner-level attorney, and this is simply a situation requiring management. He stood. He was close. Too close for a lobby. Close enough that she could feel the specific quality of air between them, charged, aware, the air of two people who have history in their bodies and are both pretending they do not. How old? He said. Not a question about age. A calculation he had already completed, confirmed, and needed her to answer anyway, because hearing her say it would make it real in a way that his own arithmetic could not. 6, she said. He closed his eyes for 1 second. 1 second of no control at all. When he opened them, something had shifted. The fracture line she had seen in the lobby had widened, and through it was something she had not seen on his face in 7 years. Not the heir, not the empire, not the Han Min-jae who controlled everything and showed nothing. Just a man. Just a man standing in a hotel lobby in Seoul, 7 years older and no less ruined by her than he had been the night she disappeared. I looked for you, he said. Low. Not an accusation. Something more careful than accusation. Something that needed to understand before it could afford to feel. 7 years. Every resource I had. Your father was thorough. I know. You knew I was looking. I knew you might be looking. She held his gaze because looking away would be the first concession, and she could not afford concessions right now. Not with Kai 6 inches away logging every micro-expression. I also knew your family would be looking, and I knew which one of you would find us first if I made myself findable. Something moved through his jaw. You thought I would let them. I thought I was 20 years old, and the head of your family was a woman who had been eliminating complications for 40 years, and you had asked me for a week. Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. I did not have a week, Min-jae. I had a plane at 4 a.m. and my father telling me what happened to the women who trusted Han men to protect them from Han families. So I made the only calculation I could afford to make. He stepped closer. She did not step back. That was the first thing that surprised her. That she did not step back. That her body, presented with the proximity of Han Min-jae after 7 years, they made the decision to hold its ground before she consciously authorized it. He was close enough now that she could see the specific quality of his stillness, not the controlled stillness of the boardroom, but the stillness of something held very tightly by a man who is aware that releasing it in a hotel lobby would be a mistake. He has my eyes, Min-jae said. Yes. He has my... He stopped, steadied himself. He organized his approach before he crossed the lobby. He timed his stop. He calculated the distance. He does that, she said. He does that with everything. Min-jae looked at his son. Kai looked back at him with the patient, assessing expression of a small person who has been listening to this entire exchange and has already formed several conclusions he is choosing not to share yet. You are my father, Kai said. Not a question. A case closed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the hotel. Min-jae looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he looked at Roberta. Then back at the boy. And Han Min-jae, who had walked into every room of his adult life already knowing the outcome, who had never been caught unprepared, who had built an empire on the specific skill of not being surprised, had absolutely nothing to say. Well, Kai said, filling the silence with the brisk efficiency of a man moving a meeting forward when it has stalled. This is a significant development. I suggest we find somewhere private to discuss the implications. We are creating a scene. He looked around the lobby briefly. Also, your security team has been watching this interaction from the entrance for approximately 4 minutes. You may want to signal them. Min-jae blinked, looked toward the entrance, looked back at his son. How did you... 2 men in dark suits who have not moved in 4 minutes and whose eye contact keeps returning to you, Kai said. It is not subtle. He looked at Roberta. Mom, the car is waiting. But I think we should reschedule the morning. He looked at Min-jae. I have questions. I have prepared them. I will need approximately 45 minutes of your time. Min-jae Han stood in the lobby of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, looking at the 6-year-old who had just assessed his security detail, rescheduled his mother's billion-dollar morning, and informed him that a meeting had been scheduled at his convenience. And something happened in his face that Roberta had seen only a handful of times in all the months she had loved him in secret. He was undone. Completely. Quietly. Entirely undone. And the empire and the control and the 7 years of carefully maintained distance could not do a single thing about it. They moved to a private dining room off the main lobby. Min-jae arranged it with 2 words to a staff member who appeared at his elbow with the trained alertness of someone who had spent years learning to materialize exactly when Han Min-jae needed something and disappear the moment he did not. The room was small and quiet, with a window that looked out onto a courtyard garden where Seoul's morning light came in sideways and cold and honest. Kai examined the room upon entry, assessed the seating arrangements, selected the chair that gave him the clearest sightline to both adults, and sat down with his notebook open and his pen ready. Roberta and Min-jae sat across from each other. The table between them was not large enough. There is a specific quality to the silence between 2 people who have years of unspoken things sitting in the air, not empty silence, not comfortable silence, but the full, pressurized silence of a room where everything that needs to be said has been waiting so long it has developed weight. You can feel it against your skin. You can feel it in the specific way neither person reaches for their water glass, because moving feels like it might disturb something that needs to be disturbed very carefully. Min-jae spoke first. I want to tell you something, he said, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Roberta looked at him. Tell me. He was quiet for a moment, not calculating, she realized, not assembling an argument, deciding how much of himself to place on the table, deciding whether the exposure was worth the risk. He decided. 3 days after you left, he said, I went to your apartment. I had spent 72 hours planning everything, how to tell my family, how to position it, how to make them understand that what I had with you was not something they got to categorize or manage. I had thought it through from every angle. I had decided. He paused. You were gone. Your father had resigned. Your apartment had been cleared. No forwarding information. Nothing. Roberta was very still. I hired investigators, he said. 3 of them, simultaneously. I told each one separately so there was no coordination failure, so the search covered more ground. I gave them every piece of information I had, your father's professional history, your university records, your family connections. And I gave them resources without limits. He looked at the table briefly, then back at her. They found nothing. Your father had been thorough in a way that told me he had planned the disappearance before he executed it. Before you told him you were pregnant even. He had a protocol already in place. He was protecting me, she said. I know that now. His voice was even, not accusatory, moving through the facts the way he moved through everything, precisely, without performing the emotion, but not pretending it was absent either. At the time, I thought... He stopped. I thought you had used me, that the relationship had been strategic, that your father had placed you in proximity to the Han family deliberately, and when the situation became complicated, you had both extracted yourselves. The room was very quiet. You thought I ran because I didn't love you. For approximately 3 weeks? Yes. He looked at her directly. And then I stopped being able to make that explanation hold because it did not account for you. The way you argued with me. The things you said at 2 a.m. in that library when there was no audience and no strategy and nothing to perform for. That was not calculated. I knew what calculated looked like. I had grown up surrounded by it. His jaw tightened. What you were was real. And a woman who was real did not run because she wanted to. She ran because she was afraid of what staying would cost her. Roberta felt something in her chest begin to give way. She did not let it show. When did you know? She asked. 6 months after you left. He said it flatly. Like a man reading from a document he has reviewed so many times, it has lost its power to wound him, except it had not, which was evident in the specific controlled quality of his breathing. I found evidence of my family's interest in your situation, communications between my grandmother's staff and certain people she used for sensitive matters. Your name appeared in those communications. He paused. She had been watching you for 4 months before you left. She knew about us before I told her. She had already begun assessing the situation. The silence this time was different. Colder. She was going to act, Roberta said. She had already begun to act. Your father intercepted something. I do not know what. He was thorough enough that I still do not have the complete picture. And he moved first. Min-jae looked at his hands briefly. He was right to. If he had waited even another week? He stopped. He was right to. Kai, who had been sitting in his chair with the focused stillness of a small person taking very careful notes, looked up. So, he said. You were not indifferent. You were outmaneuvered. Yes, Min-jae said. And you spent 7 years looking. Yes. Kai made a note. That is a relevant distinction, he said. I am updating my assessment. Min-jae reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed a small box on the table. Not dramatically. Not with ceremony or performance. He placed it the way a man places something he has been carrying for a very long time and is simply, finally, setting down, with the quiet relief of someone whose arms have been tired for years and who has found at last a surface that can hold the weight. It was a ring box, dark leather, slightly worn at the corners. Roberta looked at it. I bought it the week before you left, he said. December. I had already decided. I did not need a week. That was not what I meant when I said I needed a week. I needed a week to prepare what I was going to say to my family. The decision was already made. He did not open the box. He left it on the table between them. I have carried it since then. Every meeting, every trip, every morning for 7 years. I told myself it was because I was going to find you. Some days I believed that. The silence was the kind that exists after something important has been placed in a room and the room is adjusting to hold it. Min-jae, she said. I am not asking you for anything, he said. Not tonight. Not yet. I only want you to know that when I said I needed a week, I was not building a case for whether to want you. I had already decided that. I was building a case for how to keep you. His voice stayed even for most of that sentence. At the end, at the word keep, It did not. I am sorry I did not move faster. I am sorry faster was what was required, and I did not understand that until it was too late. 3 seconds of silence. The kind that is not empty. The kind that contains everything that cannot be said in words, because words are not large enough for it. I didn't know, she said, quietly. The 2 words that held 7 years inside them. The flight, the hospital room, the 3 a.m. studying, the iron determination and the loneliness and the dreams she had not permitted herself, and the lock she had kept on the part of her memory that held his face. All of it inside 2 words. I didn't know. He looked at her for a long time. I know, he said. Kai closed his notebook. He stood, pushed his chair back with the contained precision of a man excusing himself from a negotiation that has reached a natural pause, and looked between the 2 adults with the expression of someone reviewing a situation and finding it, on balance, moving in an acceptable direction. I am going to give you 15 minutes, he said. I will be in the lobby. I have reading to do. He picked up his tablet. The ring is beautiful, for what it is worth. I assessed it when he placed it on the table. The proportions are correct for her hand. He looked at Min-jae. Good judgment. He walked to the door. Paused. Also, he said, without turning around, I have decided you are not terrible. The data supports a cautious positive assessment. A brief pause. That is high praise from me. In case you needed context. He left. The door closed. Roberta and Min-jae sat in the quiet room with the ring box between them and 7 years of distance that was, for the first time, beginning to feel like something that could be crossed. The Han family gathering was 3 days later. Min-jae arranged it with the specific efficiency of a man who understood that some things could not be approached gradually. That sometimes the only way to move through a difficult room was to walk in first and let everyone else adjust. The Han estate had not changed. Same iron gates, same long drive, same architecture that said, power lives here and has lived here for a long time and is not interested in your opinion about it. Roberta walked through those gates the way she walked into courtrooms, with her full height and her composure assembled, and the specific deliberate pace of a woman who has decided that the room does not get to intimidate her today. Kai walked beside her. He had chosen his best suit for the occasion, the charcoal one with the pocket square he had selected himself. He had also, she discovered when he handed her a small typed document in the car on the way over, prepared a brief summary of the key family members, their roles within the Han structure, and what he called their probable objection profiles. You researched his family, she said. I researched my family, he said. It seemed prudent to understand the operating environment. The objections came quickly. Min-jae's uncle, a man with the bearing of someone who had spent decades managing the gap between the Han family's public face and its operational reality, looked at Roberta with the specific assessment of a person calculating value and finding the arithmetic insufficient. The situation, he said, with the careful language of a man who had spent years making unpleasant things sound administrative, is complicated. The boy's position can be managed. But the woman, her name, Min-jae said, is Roberta. The room's temperature dropped slightly. Roberta's position within the family structure raises questions that the board will. She is the mother of my son. Min-jae's voice was not raised. It was something more absolute than raised, the voice of a man stating a fact that he is prepared to repeat as many times as necessary and defend against any challenge that arises from it, for as long as the challenge continues. That makes her untouchable. By the board, by the family, by anyone in this room or outside of it. He paused. This is not a discussion. I am informing you. He reached for Roberta's hand, found it, held it, in front of the entire assembled Han family, in the formal sitting room of the estate where decisions had been made for 40 years by people who did not make decisions based on something as inefficient as love, Han Minjae held Roberta Timfrey's hand and looked at his family and did not look away. Roberta felt his thumb move once across her knuckles. A small movement, almost imperceptible. But it was not for the room. It was for her. It was the specific private language of a man telling the person beside him, "I have you. You are not alone in this. Not this time." She did not squeeze his hand back. She did not need to. Her stillness said everything. Kai, standing to her left in his charcoal suit, looked at his grandmother, Minjae's mother, who had been observing the exchange with the contained expression of a woman processing multiple things at once, and extended his hand with the formal courtesy of a person conducting an introduction at a business summit. "I am Kai," he said. "I understand this is a significant adjustment for the family. I am prepared to answer questions in an organized fashion, if that would be helpful. I have anticipated the most probable concerns, and I have responses prepared." He paused. "I am also prepared to submit to a DNA test if the genetic evidence is insufficient, though I would note that the visual evidence is fairly conclusive." Minjae's mother looked at the child for a long moment. She looked at Minjae. She looked at Roberta. Something moved through her face. Not warmth exactly, but the precursor to warmth. The thing that exists in the moment before a person who has been very controlled for a very long time allows something through. "He has your mouth," she said to Minjae, "from when you were small." She looked at Kai. "And your father's arrogance." "I prefer confidence," Kai said. "Arrogance implies unfounded certainty. My certainty is founded." A pause. "Yes," she said. "He is yours." The proposal happened quietly. No audience, no ceremony, no orchestration. It was the last evening of the Seoul trip. The signing was done, and the gala was over. Kai was asleep in the suite upstairs, though Roberta was not entirely confident he was actually asleep, given his documented tendency to be awake and processing during situations he had designated as significant. Minjae found her on the hotel terrace, the same city below that had been below them 7 years ago when she was 20, and the world was warm and dangerous, and she had not yet understood what it meant to lose something she had not been careful enough to hold. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a while. That had always been one of the things about him that she had not known how to describe to anyone who had not experienced it. The way he could be quiet beside you without the quiet feeling like absence. The way his silence was present, full. He reached into his jacket. He placed the ring box on the terrace railing between them. "I have been holding this for 7 years, he said. "I would like to stop holding it alone." She looked at the box. She looked at him. This man who had searched for her with every resource available to him, who had walked into a family gathering and held her hand in front of people who had spent decades conditioning him to prioritize the family above every personal feeling he had, who had crouched down in a hotel lobby and looked at his son for the first time and not asked for anything, not time, not explanation, not absolution, just looked and loved and accepted the weight of what had been lost without demanding she carry any of the blame for the losing. This man. "I did not come back to Seoul for love," she said. He was very still. "I know," he said. I came back because I had a job to do, and I was too good at it to walk away." She looked at the city below. "I told myself that for 6 weeks after I accepted the assignment. I was very convincing." "Were you?" "For approximately the first 5 weeks." She turned to look at him. The 6th week was more difficult. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile. Something quieter than a smile. Something that lived in the eyes. She picked up the ring box. Opened it. The ring inside was exactly what it was. Chosen by a 24-year-old man in December for a 20-year-old woman he had already decided on, and held for 7 years through everything that followed, and offered now across a terrace in the city where they had started, with all of that history visible in the worn leather of the box and the perfect unchanged stillness of the stone. "Yes," she said. She did not need him to ask. They both understood that the question had been asked 7 years ago in the planning of it, and asked again in the carrying of it, and asked once more in the placing of it on the railing between them. She had heard all three. His answer was to take the ring from the box and put it on her hand, with the careful steadiness of a man who is not going to rush this, who has waited 7 years for this specific moment and intends to be entirely present for it. He held her hand for a moment afterward. Just held it. Kai appeared on the terrace 14 seconds later. Roberta did not ask how he knew. She no longer asked how Kai knew things. He looked at his mother's hand, looked at his father, looked at his mother, produced his notebook. "I am updating the family status too. Resolved," he said, making a note with the satisfaction of a man closing a long-running case file. "Also," he looked between them, "does this mean I have 2 bodyguards now? Because I have some concerns about the current security arrangements." Roberta laughed. It came out of her before she could compose it, the way the best laughs do. Not performed, not managed, just suddenly present. Full and warm and real. Min-jae looked at her when she laughed, the way he had always looked at her. Directly. Entirely. With the specific focused attention of a man who finds one thing in a room worth watching and has stopped pretending otherwise. "Yes," he said to Kai. 2 bodyguards. "Excellent." Kai closed his notebook. "I have a list of recommended protocols. I will circulate it in the morning." He looked at the Seoul skyline for one moment. Just a boy looking at a city. "This is a good place," he said quietly. "I think we should stay." 7 years ago, Roberta Timfrey ran from Seoul in the dark to save her son. She left behind a man who was already carrying a ring she would not see for 7 years, searching for her with every resource he had, and rebuilding the empire she had feared into something she could stand inside without looking for the exits. She did not know any of that when she ran. She only knew the 4 a.m. flight, and the cold glass and the city lights shrinking below her, and the promise she made to a child who was not yet born, that she would build them something, that she would be enough. She was enough. She was more than enough. And now she was standing on a terrace in Seoul with a ring on her hand and a man beside her who had proven, in every way available to him, that some things do not end simply because they become difficult. And a 6-year-old in a charcoal suit between them, already drafting the security protocols for the family he had decided, with the calm efficiency of a tiny CEO who had run the data and reached his conclusion, was now operational. Today, she stayed. Not because she had to. Not because love had cornered her or circumstance had made the decision for her. But because she was Roberta Timfrey, who did not beg, who did not break, who had built something extraordinary from nothing and raised a son who quoted strategy books and negotiated his bedtime, and had walked across a hotel lobby at the age of 6 and ended a 7-year silence in 30 seconds flat. And she had chosen, freely, in with both eyes open and her full height, and the specific quiet certainty of a woman who has survived the worst of the story and arrived, finally, at the part worth telling. She stayed. If you have ever stood in the wreckage of a decision you made to survive and wondered whether surviving was enough, if you have ever built something with your bare hands in the dark, not because you were certain it would hold, but because the alternative was standing still, and standing still was not something you could afford. If you have ever loved someone so completely that leaving them felt like removing something structural, like pulling a wall out of a building and watching the ceiling recalculate, then you already understand Roberta Timfrey. You understand the 4 a.m. flight, and the cold glass and the city lights shrinking below her. You understand the promise made to a child not yet born in a hospital room in August. You understand the 3 a.m. studying and the iron jaw and the suits and the corner office and the 7 years of forward motion that never quite outran the thing it was moving away from. You understand what it costs to be the strong one, not because strength is easy, because it is not. Because strength is not the absence of fear. It is what you build on top of fear when fear is the only foundation available, when the materials are insufficient, and the timeline is impossible, and there is no one coming to help you, and you build anyway. Roberta built anyway. She built a career that put her name in rooms that had never held it. She built a life in a city that did not know her history and did not ask. She built a son. And this is the part that matters most. In the part that sits underneath everything else in this story, like the load-bearing thing it is. She built a son who walked into the world with his father's eyes and his mother's spine, and the specific terrifying combination of both of them in a 3-piece suit. And that son was the proof. Not of her loss, of what she had chosen to do with it. Because that is the thing about the hardest chapters. They do not exist to break you. They exist to show you what you are made of when breaking is the easier option, and you choose something else. When you could stop, and you do not stop. When you could let the fear make the decision, and instead, you make it yourself. With both hands, in full knowledge of what it costs. Roberta Timfrey ran from Seoul because she loved her son more than she feared being alone. She came back to Seoul because she had become someone who no longer needed to run. And somewhere in the space between those two women, the 20-year-old pressed against the plane window and the partner-level attorney in the Louboutin who walked back through the front door, a 6-year-old boy in a burgundy tie had crossed a hotel lobby and done what all the investigators and the 7 years and the private jets and the restructured empire could not do. He had simply walked up and asked the question, and the answer had been waiting the entire time. Han Min-jae had a ring in his pocket for 7 years. He had searched with every resource available to him. He had rebuilt something dark into something that could hold the people he loved without endangering them. He had done all of this quietly, without audience, without the guarantee that she would ever know. That is not the behavior of a man who moved on. That is the behavior of a man who decided, at 24 years old in a library in Seoul, that he had found the one interesting thing, and spent 7 years refusing to file it as lost. Some people would call that obsession. Roberta Timfrey called it the moment she understood that love, when it is real, does not require your participation to continue. It simply continues. It restructures empires and carries ring boxes and waits in hotel lobbies and goes still when elevator doors open. And it is still there, intact, slightly worn at the edges the way the ring box was worn at the edges, but fundamentally unchanged. She had spent 7 years thinking she was the only one still carrying it. She was not the only one. She was never the only one. This story is not about a billionaire. It is not about an empire or a family or a billion-dollar merger or a 6-year-old who negotiates bedtime and assesses security protocols, and once rescheduled his mother's entire morning from the hotel lobby using nothing but eye contact and a briefcase. Though Kai is, genuinely, the most extraordinary development in this or any other story, and if you are not fully committed to him by this point, then this narrator does not know what else can be done for you. This story is about the moment you stop running. Not because the thing you were running from has become safe, though sometimes it does. Sometimes it becomes safe. Sometimes the man restructures the empire and waits, and that is real, and it happens. But because you have become someone who does not need safety to stand still. Because the work you did in the running, the years of building and fighting and refusing to break and raising a tiny suited genius who reads the Financial Times and cross-references his emotional assessments in a notebook. That work changed you. It built the woman who could walk back through those airport doors with her full height and her composed face and the specific quiet certainty of someone who has already survived the worst chapter and knows, with the particular confidence that only survival gives you, that she can survive anything else that comes. She ran to save her son. She came back to claim her life. And she did not beg for either. If this story sat somewhere in your chest, if Roberta felt familiar, if her silence felt familiar, and if you have ever packed a suitcase in the dark and moved toward the only option that made sense even though it cost you something you were not sure you could afford to lose, then stay. Because the next story is already waiting. And somewhere in it, there is another woman who is about to discover that the thing she ran from has been holding a ring in its pocket the entire time. 7 years ago, she ran from Seoul to save her son. Today, she stayed. For him. For Kai. For the version of herself that had been waiting, patient and certain, on the other side of all that surviving. And that, finally, was enough.